you've been so super busy that, of course, nobody could get you. Your sixth release since October 2020. Well, nobody could say the pandemic's been bad for you, huh?
Well, I think it's been a lot of things for everybody. You know, you worry about your friends and family far away, and sometimes there are difficult things to deal with. But I would be grateful for the time that I got to spend with my young sons and my wife. And I am fortunate to have been sort of already underway with making one record, which was became Hey Clockface. And really, secretly, we had been working already for nearly 2 years on a record called Spanish Model, which Sebastian Cruz, my producer and co-producer, had been putting together with numbers sort of artists from Latin America and Spain singing Spanish adaptations of my songs from this year's model record, and we had
Uh-huh.
recorded their vocals over the original backing tracks. Well, we were just about ready to spring this, admittedly unusual idea on everybody when circumstances, meant that it wasn't really good timing for
Of
releasing any
course.
record.
Of
And
course.
so we did put out Hey Clockface, but what people didn't know was by then we'd already made The Boy Named If.
Ah,
When
and you
we
just
released
sat
it,
on
we
it for a while.
we went straight into working in the summer of last year.
Right.
And by then, I had been busy. I had been busy through the spring finishing Hey Clockface and listening to the mixes that Sebastian had been doing of several different projects. Steve Naive had been busy because he and his partner Muriel Teodori immediately re-recorded several songs from Hey Clockface with French language
Ah,
singing.
okay.
Iggy Pop being one of them. Iggy
I
Pop, the
heard that,
actress
yeah.
Isabella Johnny, and Davey Farragher, our bass player, had taught himself to play the double bass while we'd been waiting for time to go back on the stage.
Amazing.
The only person who wasn't very busy was Pete, our drummer. He was down in his basement, you know,
Hanging out,
faithfully playing his daily routine at his Gretsch kit, which he played on the first
waiting.
record that,
Uh,
like most drummers, he likes to be ready for the call, and he's not gonna, he doesn't want to get rusty.
yeah,
Literally, he does his swimming every morning. He goes down in the basement, plays hours a day.
and
I
waits
said,
for the call.
well, what's
It's
better than a new
awesome.
song? What if you've
Yeah.
been playing along with all your favorite records for 3 months or more by then? He was delighted when I said, "Well, here's a new song." And
Yeah.
before I could think anything about it or talk myself out of it, I found that, you know, Pete and I were having a kind of conversation, sending the songs back and forward. And
Yeah.
these days, because of the ability to record from anywhere, we weren't just sending back some little scratchy demo, we were making records.
I know, it's
And
amazing the
then,
technology,
and
isn't
then
it?
then it was a question of really accepting that we were doing something for real.
Yeah.
And in many ways, we all seemed to play with more abandon and we were less inhibited for not looking at each other.
Yeah. Yeah. That,
Very
that it,
strange,
it makes
really,
a
to discover
difference.
that. I
Yeah.
don't know whether it would have been so for every kind of music, but these particular songs, which were mostly major key to begin with and up tempo, or at least they were brighter in tempo than things I'd written most recently, they seemed to really suit the way we played. And before we knew where we were, we had this album. So I'm very
So, I mean,
grateful.
you must have been as surprised as anyone else that you got this together so quickly. And I've heard them, I've read them described as urgent, immediate songs. What was it about you that turned these into urgent, immediate songs?
Well, I found myself thinking about, I've got now 15-year-old twin boys. I have an adult son. Um, when I wrote and recorded this record, my mother was still with us. I knew that the time wasn't endless for her. She had had a major stroke in
Sorry to
2008,
hear it.
and she passed in January this year, long after we finished the record. But I suppose all of those thoughts, the balance of all of those times in life, made me start writing about the different times in life you pass through and things that you leave behind, not always willingly, particularly, say, initially, The Boy Named If is talks about an imaginary friend, which is a charming invention to excuse you for various mischief when you're 7. But when you're still blaming your imaginary friend for your indiscretions when you're 37, perhaps less endearing, shall we say? There's, I said the record's about the transition from being a child to being told to stop acting like a child, which for most
Yes.
men and some women, I have to say, is any time in the next 50 or 60 years. So
Yeah.
took, I wrote portraits or wrote scenes, which became songs, of different moments in life that I remembered in different ways. Some of them real, slightly imagined, more romantic maybe. Portrait of a teacher that sort of just isn't so much teaching by the lessons as the example of her own indifference to the job of teaching, because she
Really?
clearly had her mind on a completely different life.
Oh,
And I had
no.
a teacher like that when I was about my boy's age, and I found her very thrilling in a strange sort of way because she was a real person who was evidently going to go somewhere quite exciting, which
Amazing.
didn't involve teaching us English. She had her mind on a whole other career.
So, having
And
both your twin boys and your aging mother at that time really kind of sat you in the middle to look at all sides of life and put
maybe
your mortality
that's
in
as best I
question?
can explain why the stories in this record should be the ones they are.
I love
I,
how lyric rich the album is.
thank
It's
you.
one of those to sit down and really ponder. And of course, the book that you've put out with it that contains the stories enables the listener, the reader, the viewer to do just that, doesn't it?
Well, I had already devised the illustration, which is the cover, when the record company told me there was a chance there wouldn't be an immediate prospect of a vinyl edition for this record. And therefore I was concerned that like many records today, that would be a series of individual songs on in a stream, and it wouldn't be heard as a story
Yes.
or in the way that the songs were supposed to hold together, at least initially. I mean, people will always have their favorite tune. They might. I used to make mixtapes, on cassette, which I loved, because you would hear things, and I have no problem with people listening in any random order they want,
Yeah.
except initially I'd like to make my case for this group of songs being heard in it, as a piece.
In the sequence that you've put it
Yeah,
together
and
because they
so
do tell a
I said,
story.
yeah, and I said, well, why don't I make that book a reality? Why don't I make it so you can open it and it's an actual three-dimensional object? I had no idea that everybody would take it quite so seriously. I mean, I quickly wrote these short stories, which have the same titles as the songs, so that I suppose they provide maybe the scene immediately before the lyric begins or the song begins, or some background detail, or the postscript to whatever you read in them or take out of them is what's happening. But I enjoyed writing them. They came to me in about the same amount of time as it took me to write the songs, which wasn't very long. So they seemed to kind of all want to be together. And I had been working on these illustrations for a number of years now, but this gave me a reason to actually make it have the appearance, at least, of a children's storybook, even though obviously the songs are not songs for children.
Of
They
course,
might sometimes refer to children, but they also refer to much older people as
yeah,
well.
and it refers to the child, I think, inside each one of us too. It certainly provides a much deeper, fuller experience and puts to shame all those days when people just put out CDs or cassettes or the like. I'm so excited that we get back to being able to touch, feel, smell and
Well,
read
thank you.
more about the music. It's really wonderful. Do
Oh,
songs just drop for you? Do they come out of heaven and they're like this gift for you that the less you try, well, that they're there when they're ready to be there rather than you having to put in effort to try and create them?
oh no, I don't. There's nothing sort of. There's not sort of. I don't think of myself as a conduit for some sort of, spiritual thing that's happening there. I think the very highest achievements in writing and performing, even sometimes, can have their, can be in a place like sacraments, but you don't get there very often. But I will say that there are times when I do go into some sort of, I suppose it's like a trance, because I'm working. I'm aware. I'm conscious. I'm not like, I'm not sort of trying to make it sound mysterious, but I won't be aware of time passing.
Right.
But I do think when I'm playing the guitar, the possibilities of the harmony are facing away from you. You're not looking at the fretboard all the time. You're hearing a tune in your head. The rhythm you're playing on the guitar might carry the words out of you, and before you know it, I've written some things down, and it's pulling more of the thoughts out that are connected to those. That's the best I can describe it. When I write at the piano, all of those possibilities of harmony and melody are sort of there and as a diagram on the piano, something I don't play very well. So I'm more inclined to go, oh, I love that chord, and then I'm linger there for a while, and I might end up with quite a lot of music before you know, any literate idea comes to mind, any definition.
Right.
I've been
Right.
given pieces of music written by other people and had to ponder them a long time till I could hear the words within them, even though the mood of the music was really clear to me right away and even the
Uh-huh.
intent. So I don't treat it completely like some sort of elevated spiritual, you know,
I hear you. But
automatic.
is it
That,
always a pleasure though?
most of the time it can be frustrating. At some point, that when I'm writing with the guitar, particularly that pulling the music pulling the words out of you sort of thing
Uh-huh.
happens up to a point, and then you have to stop to consider what you have. And the example would be something like "Mistook Me for a Friend" from about halfway through this record. It's a song
Yeah.
about being a young man in a town where you don't know who your friends are, you don't know who you're in love with, all your allegiances have all been turned upside down. And it's the words are tumbling out trying to describe this in very quick images. But at some point, I stopped and thought, I have to get into the next section. So there's a guitar figure which is very composed. I actually thought I need something to stop the flow of the words and start the next part of the story. So that's craft, isn't it? That part when I wrote that guitar figure is craft. The other things are inspiration. So it's a combination of the two.
Love it.
And I think at the speed you tend to write if you're writing fast songs, it all blurs together. You don't sort of go, well, I better put my craft hat on and, put some screws in here. It's not that conscious, but
Well, I reckon
when
you've
I'm
got
looking
it
at
pretty
it
well
all
down
now, I'm
pat.
aware that there's a certain amount of consideration of how corners are turned that comes after the initial rush of inspiration. Otherwise, all the songs would just be on one chord and being
Yeah,
coherent. You
yeah.
know,
Well, we thank you so much for putting your time and effort in because what you're turning out is, in my personal opinion, your best ever. You just seem to be getting better and better with age. Are you still as
thank you.
passionate? You're obviously still as passionate as you were when you first set out.
Well, I think if I if I were not different in some way, there would be something badly wrong if I hadn't have learned anything,
Absolutely.
and at all, or for that matter, have any sense of a certain degree of the good fortune that's come my way and the collaborations that I've had. Most of all, I have to say, because it's the volume of work that we've done together. Two of the people that play on this record I've played with on and off for 45 years, and Davey, our bass player, for 20. Now, all those collaborations that, whether they be for one song or 15 songs or 30 songs, and a couple of those co-writers are very, very notable people. Paul McCartney, Burt Bacharach. People remark on that, but then there's the other sort of 350 songs that I've written on my own. They're like, I mean, there's obviously fortune, and there would be a sense of both gratitude that they came to me, and that somebody still wants to hear some that I wrote quite a long time ago, but also that idea that you're learning. Sometimes I didn't go to college, for instance. I didn't go to university. I didn't go to art school. That should be obvious from looking at my illustrations. I didn't go to music school either. You know,
You've learnt on the job.
Steve Naive, we kidnapped from the Royal College of Music. I probably have learned all the more formal things of music along the way as I've
Of
needed them.
course.
I
Yeah.
learned to notate music when I was 40. I learned to
Yeah.
orchestrate when I was in my 40s.
Yeah.
Before that, I used to have to try and communicate my ideas by describing things, and that's fine when you're talking about three chords with a group of musicians and you can play the acoustic guitar and say, kind of goes like this, and it kind of goes like that Small Faces record, and we all know what that means. And then we play a mutated version of a rhythm we heard on another record or a chord sequence that we were turned on its head. When you're trying to communicate with 60 string players, you can't do that. You
Of course.
actually have to have it written on the page,
Of course.
coherent.
Yeah.
So those things that I've done, which have been very different to the tools that made the original machine that I started with, those things have sometimes been a little shocking to people that were in love with those first records. But for me, that was the learning that put me another
Oh,
place further along, and then the
correct.
next thing happened, put me somewhere else.
Yeah.
And the oddest thing about it, I feel, is when you pick up the electric guitar again, instead of it being something redundant or predictable, it can be as surprising as it ever was when you first did it, and that's how you get this record.
Awesome.
If I hadn't have made these other great, to some people really wayward sounding things,
You wouldn't have got to where you are
I
now.
wouldn't have recognized the excitement of these
Yeah.
songs.
Yeah.
But for me, I like it all. I'm very, very proud of the couple of the ballads on our last record, Hey Clock Face. There are some really unusual things on that. Like I said, we had the opportunity to hear them sung back to me in another language, to hear Isabella Johnny sort of recite some verses that I wrote, who's an actor who really knows how to address the microphone in a beautifully articulated
French
voice.
voice, yes.
Iggy Pop,
Yeah.
really go to the trouble of learning this lyric that had been provided for him by Steve Noy's partner Muriel Teodori and her son Ojuk,
It's
and
awesome.
then to go through that process with a record from 43, 44 years ago, this year's model, and meet all these new singers, some of whom were friends, but most of whom I was learning about for over these last 2 years, and hearing Spanish Model and hearing songs I wrote when I was 23 about a young man's gaze at a glamorous woman and wondering how much her glamour disguised her real self. To hear that same song sung by a 24-year-old Chilean pop singer who is the girl on the poster looking out at us,
Right.
that's
It's
pretty exciting.
incredible.
That's pretty
Yeah.
exciting. We had that reverse of the story in many times throughout that Spanish Model record.
Elvis Costello, I just want your life. Can we swap?
Well, I want to, but I want it to involve coming to Australia so I can come and play.
Please do very
Yeah, it
soon.
would be very good to be there. It's been really too long, and of course the recent emergency has meant that traveling anywhere has been quite
Well,
tricky. We did
fingers
22
crossed it
days,
won't be too long. I
22
have to
days
let
in
you go now.
America.
They're
Yeah.
asking me to wind up. So
Oh
I've
yeah.
so
Well, don't you
enjoyed
worry about that.
speaking
It's
to you.
very, very, very pleasure to speak with you. I will say that we will be back.